appearance.
Yeah. So we're going to hear about Jiva Goswami. Yes. What?
Why Katha Maharaj is also giving class, he just dinged. That was get a ding.
We got some transcendental competition going.
Yes.
That word, transcendental competition, is very well known by Prabhupada disciples. But by new devotees, they don't know the history. Yeah. You know what it means?
I mean, kind of take the context clues. Competition on Katha.
Well, the thing is that Srila Prabhupada, he was very much enlivened by the book distribution as the devotees in around 1970-71, they began to go out in force with the chanting parties, but also distributing books along with the chanting parties. And every temple president would give reports to Prabhupada, I think practically weekly. It started to become like that. They'd tell Prabhupada how many of which books have been sold in the public. And then there was 1971 was a breakthrough time, because, and Rishabdev Prabhu, he knows who was involved in that. It was like Keshava Prabhu, and they went on a traveling party, one of the first traveling Sankirtan parties, to simply distribute books, not to do chanting. Maybe they did a little chanting here and there. And they were also experimenting with different ways of getting people to, in a favorable way, receive the books. So they were going door to door. Actually, the reports that we got in Wisconsin of that winter of 71 to 72, I was in Madison, Wisconsin. We got these reports that the devotees have started to go door to door. And it kind of started out with, I think it was up in Berkeley, where they just took a box of Krishna books, big Krishna books, and just went across the lawns of each house, and they went to the doors and sold the books, Before that, we didn't have such bold, such bold methodologies, but now it started like that. So that was kind of like the beginning of the book distribution. And then Hansaduta, I remember Hansaduta, perhaps in New York, but he started to give kind of like classes to the devotees, how to distribute the books, what to say. They developed different sales pitches. Each devotee had their own different, unique way. And some ways were very, very effective. Then they started experimenting going undercover. Now that was the beginning of the undercover book distribution. Undercover meant you didn't show that you had a shaved head and you had a wig on. Actually, we all had our wigs. The ladies, of course, didn't have to do that. They could go, but they were also wearing regular street clothing. So there were many, many exchanges with Prabhupada asking, is this okay? Can we do this? Like that. And there's a whole book actually that ISKCON compiled. I think it's called Preaching is the Essence. And it has many, many quotations from Srila Prabhupada, especially from his letters. JP will remember all this as well. Yeah, so, and Gopa Nandini, she was out in those vans, probably as early as like 73 or
75.
75,
Yeah.
yeah, a little bit later. That's when it was already, boom, it was in full swing.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, there were dozens of traveling Sankirtan parties circulating all over America, and they were doing it in Europe, in Australia, South America, yeah, South America was big. We would get these reports from the different countries, what are their book distribution scores. So anyway, it kind of became developed as an institutional practice, that there would be reports coming out regularly about worldwide book distribution. And then there would be reports of different letters that Srila Prabhupada had sent, describing how much happiness he was getting from this. He was saying things like, "Oh, when I hear these book distribution reports, I get an extension of my life." So all the devotees were like so fired up to distribute more and more books because Prabhupada said it's extending his life, And many, many exchanges. Hansagati Prabhu remembers he was there in Atlanta, 1975, when Prabhupada came, and there were all book distributors converged at the airport to greet Srila Prabhupada, and then of course later when he came to the temple, and Prabhupada's mood at that time, how he was so happy to see all these devotees giving all of their energy. And no one kept a penny. It was so pure. No one kept a penny. But hundreds and thousands, even thousands of dollars were going through the devotees' hands in a month, especially the big book distributors. They were sometimes selling $300, $400 a day, which is a hell of a lot then, compared to now even. It was like $1,000. Yeah. Use the mic, because we're on Facebook. You have to press the thing.
That day Prabhupada came to Atlanta in the airport. One devotee who was my Sankirtan leader, very great personality, Charadeshina. He was doing Krishna books, and he said, "I'm not going to come back till I do 100 of them." And he did 100, and he came to the temple that day.
Yeah.
So Prabhupada was very pleased.
These, no, you keep it there. Don't turn it off. Keep it on, because then we can just hand it if somebody's going to speak anything. Yeah, better turn it off. Yeah. The devotees who were, the top book distributors, they had a certain kind of prestige, right? They got the Maha plates. They were called Maharati distributors. You know what a Maharati is? In the Mahabharata, the soldiers, the warriors, Kshatriyas, who could fight with 10,000 other soldiers single-handedly. There were such personalities on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, like Bhishma. I mean, they could literally stand in front of 10,000 and fight with them. They're called Maharati. Yes. So that term was used for the book distributors who were empowered. Then there was the whole, almost like a cult of book distributors in a good way, like Tripurari Swami. And Tripurari Swami, he was one of the leading devotees who were going out into the airports in particular. There was a whole court case where we fought and won, that we had the right, according to the Constitution, to actually go to a public place like an airport and distribute books. That was contested all through the 70s, 80s, and I think eventually they got corralled where they had to stand in one spot. But there was like literally sometime in big airports, like Los Angeles airport, they had like 10, 12 devotees going to the airport and going in all sections of the airport. And they knew the times of the flights coming in, and especially the flights coming in from different army forts. Military bases. Because the new trainees who had gone through their, what was that called? boot camp, and it lasted for about 40 days or something.
6 weeks.
6 weeks, yeah. So they were coming back, and they were like the perfect persons. A lot of them had just come from the Midwest,
They just got it.
and they also got paid
Just got big.
for that first, 6 weeks of service to Uncle Sam. They had their money in their hands. So anyway, this can go on and on. But what I was saying is that Srila Prabhupada, he kind of encouraged, he saw the enthusiasm of the Western devotees and their ingenuity, And he said, he would say things like, what's the use of your being an American if you don't do something great for Krishna? He would say things like that, So he was, Prabhupada was rejoicing in the fact that now there's practically a military force of devotees all over the world who are going out and distributing millions of books per year, I don't know what the final figure was when Prabhupada departed, but it was a couple 100 million books that had been distributed. That's huge, and it was just from these devotees who had given themselves, and that was the standard. That was the standard of sacrifice. You don't keep one penny. Prabhupada also told that. Everyone turned everything. Everyone was completely selfless. Yeah. So the term transcendental competition and the term transcendental book distribution went together. Because Prabhupada actually wrote in one letter, do you remember that letter? About how this transcendental book distribution is in the mood of the gopis. Prabhupada actually wrote that. We had no idea in those days about Gopi Bhav and the different types of gopis and the competition to serve Krishna. All that kind of information we didn't have at that time because it wasn't the time yet. But nevertheless, Prabhupada told that this is transcendental competition to please Krishna. Because he also knew that Westerners, in particular Americans, but even just like Europeans, they're very competitive. They like sports and competition and all of that kind of thing, very competitive. Kshatriya type, So Prabhupada inspired them, yes. And he would even incite them sometimes. Oh, I've seen Ramaswar, he is doing more than Tamal Krishna, like this. So in this way, everybody was swept up in this. So I forget how I even raised the point about transcendental competition.
Oh, the Hare Krishna, because I told you Maharaj didn't.
Oh yeah.
Maharaj.
So that's the thing that comes to the mind of Prabhupada disciples. As soon as there's a competitor, transcendental competition. Okay. Gurudev Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Tadalaya Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Jataha Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavanscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Langayate Girim Yat Kripa Tamaham Vande Shri Gurun Dinataranam Vancha Kalpatiruvascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahabhadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gaurati Se Nama Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye. Vrindai Tulsi Devai Priyai Keshavasya Krishna Bhakti Prade Devi Satyavachai Namo Nama Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare. First of all, I'm offering my unlimited Dandavat pranams, my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my beloved, worshipable Diksha and Siksha Gurudevs. Nityalila Pravishno Vishnupad Paramahansa Astatara Sata Sri Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada. Nityalila Pravishno Vishnupad Paramahansa Astatara Sata Sri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhara Goswami Maharaj. And Nityalila Pravishno Vishnupad Paramahansa Astatara Sata Sri Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. And my Dandavat pranams to all of my Sri Sri Rupanuga Guru Varga, and especially on this Transcendental Disappearance Day, Tirupha of Mahamahotsav Titi of Srila Jiva Goswami Pad. I am offering my unlimited Dandavat pranams at his divine lotus feet. And my Dandavat pranams to all the Vaishnavas and all the Vaishnavis. So today we're going to read from Srila Bhakti Balabhatirtha Goswami Maharaj's a book of the associates of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And we're going to read, let's see, about Srila Jiva Goswami Maharaj. So he begins, according to the Gorganadesha Deepika, which was written by Rupa Goswami, or is it written by Kavi Karnapur? I'm not remembering now. Kavi Karnapur. So, according to the Gorganadesha Deepika, Srila Jiva Goswami was Vilas Manjari in his previous incarnation in Braj. Vilas Manjari. You can see Narottam Das Thakur in some of his songs mentioning Vilasa Manjari. In verse, because Narottam Das Thakur, why would he mention Vilasa Manjari? Because he's the Siksha disciple of Jiva Goswami. In verse 200, yeah?
One time I heard a lecture of Srila Gurudev, and he's saying that Narottam Das Thakur is also Vilasa Manjari. You heard that? It's actually in on Pure Bhakti. I was reading it.
We can look
He
at
called
it.
him Anuvilas.
Anuvilas.
So little
Yeah,
Anu means
it could
little Vilas in China.
Yeah,
A little Vilasa Manjari.
Anuvilas.
Yeah.
Could be. Yeah. In verse 203 of the same book, it is stated that he was the son of Ballabha and a scholar of exemplary character. And Ballabha is who? The brother of Rupa and Sanatan.
Oh, wow.
Yes. That's why Jiva Goswami is the nephew. He's part of that family. And actually when Rupa Goswami retired and he left certain amounts, you know how it's described, how he divided his money into 25% here, 25, 50. One of those was for the education of Srila Jiva Goswami, who was just, I don't know how old he was, but he was a baby maybe even at that time. So, Sushila Pandita Shriman Jiva Shri Ballabha Atmaja. Ballabha Atmaja means the son of Ballabha. According to the Gaudiya Vaishnava Abhidan, which is an encyclopedia, by the way, under the direction of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, it's called Vaishnava Abhidan. I had a big copy of it one time in 1977. I actually bought it in the marketplace in Navadvip, and it was very rare written in Bengali, very thick, like a whole encyclopedia of all these different associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and generations down, which particular devotees did what, it's all there.
It was in English too?
No, this is in Bengali. It's been translated, I think. According to the Gaudiya Vaishnava Abhidhan, Jiva was present in this world from 1433 to 1518 of the Shak era, and that means the 1511 to 1596 of our calendar. 1511 to 1596. So he lived for like 85 years. Other sources propose that Jiva's dates are from 1533 to 1618. So there's these differences. Now, Jiva's early life. Srila Jiva Goswami appeared in the village of Ramakeli in the district of Malda as the son of Anupam Malik, that's Balaba, who had made his residence there in order to serve in the government. The name of Jiva's mother is not known. Narahari Chakravarti has given Jiva's genealogy going back 7 generations. This list, as explained by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur, has been given here in this volume in the chapter on Srila Rupa Goswami. So Jiva Goswami's father's original name was Balaba, but Mahaprabhu gave him the name Anupam. So when Mahaprabhu came to Ramakeli, he met Anupam for the first time. By his desire, a spirit of renunciation took root in Rupa and Sanatan upon meeting the Lord on that occasion. So we've always heard that Mahaprabhu met Rupa Sanatan and their brother at Ramakeli. Mahaprabhu actually came there. So when Mahaprabhu came to Ramakeli, so this spirit of renunciation took root in Rupa and Sanatan upon meeting the Lord on that occasion. This led to their abandonment of their worldly duties and possessions not long thereafter, and they set off in an effort to be reunited with Mahaprabhu in Vrindavan. The same spirit of renunciation took hold in Jiva Goswami's heart at this time also, as has been vividly described by Narahari in Bhakti Ratnakar as follows. Jiva's mind became distracted from the time that his 2 uncles went to Vrindavan. So he was there still in the village, but his mind became distracted. He abandoned his jewels and his fine dress, his comfortable bed and his various amusements. It was as though nothing interested him anymore. He could not bear hearing news of political and other material affairs. Narahari summarizes Jiva's early life story as follows. In a dream, Jiva had a vision of Mahaprabhu dancing in the midst of Sankirtan. He was overwhelmed by feelings of divine love and soon thereafter left his home in Bakla Chandradvip. He had some companions who went with him as far as Fatehabad, but from there he continued alone to Navadvip. There he met Sri Nityananda Prabhu in the home of Srivas Pandit and received his blessings. Nityananda Prabhu told him at that time that he should go to Vrindavan. It's not told here, but Bhakti Vinod Thakur has written a whole book called Navadvip Mahatmya, wherein he tells of Jiva Goswami going on Navadvip Parikrama with Nityananda Prabhu. So with fatherly affection, Nityananda touched Jiva's head with his feet. This is actually a quote from the Bhakti Ratnakar. He touched his head, Jiva's head, with his feet. He showed incomparable mercy toward Jiva, lifting him from the ground and embracing him tightly. Transported by divine ecstasy, Nityananda Prabhu said, I rushed here from Karadaha for your sake alone. He said other things like this to pacify Jiva, and then he made Srivas Pandit and the other devotees give their blessings to Jiva. After keeping Jiva there for some time with him, Nityananda Prabhu sent him off to the west. He said, "Hurry off now to Braj. That is the place the Lord has given over to your family." It is not clear whether Jiva ever met Mahaprabhu directly, even though there is a hint in the Bhakti Ratnakara that Jiva was a baby when the Lord came to Ramakeli. Thus, Jiva demonstrated an interest in devotion to the Supreme Lord from his early childhood. Even when playing with his friends, he was only interested in games that were connected to the worship of Krishna. When Jiva was a little boy, he refused to play any game with the other boys that had no relation to Krishna. Tell that to our Gurukul kids. He made images of Krishna and Balaram, and he would worship them with flowers and sandalwood paste, and he would dress and decorate them. He would gaze upon them with unblinking eyes, looking for all the world like a golden doll himself, sitting motionless on the floor. When he paid obeisances to the deities, his eyes filled with tears. He would offer their lordship sweets and then take the prasad and distribute it to his friends. That's from Bhakti Ratnakara. Next section, Jiva goes to Braja. By Nityananda's grace, Jiva was able to visit all the sacred sites in Navadvip Dham, and after completing the tour of the Dham, he traveled to Benares, which is Varanasi, where he studied all the scriptures with Madhusudan Vachaspati. And I heard that this Madhusudan Vachaspati had actually been present, pretty sure that it's him, had been present in Puri when Mahaprabhu spoke Vedanta Sutra. Or maybe it's another. Anyway, there were two different persons that Jiva Goswami studied with.
One was the brother of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya.
Right.
We don't know that.
Yeah. Maybe it'll tell. So then, after completing the tour of the Dham, he traveled to Benares, where he studied all the scriptures with Madhusudan Vachaspati. Then he went on to Vrindavan, where he remained under the tutelage of Rupa and Sanatan Goswamis. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur has written the following about Srila Jiva Goswami in his Anubhashya to the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Quote, after the disappearance of Rupa and Sanatan, Jiva was established as the topmost teacher of doctrine in the Sampradaya. He engaged everyone in the worship of Krishna through teaching the truths given by Mahaprabhu himself. On occasion, he would sometimes do the Braj Dham Parikrama with the other devotees, and sometimes would go to visit Vittaladev in Mathura. You know who Vittaladev is? Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami wrote the Chaitanya Charitamrita while Jiva was still alive. And not long thereafter, when Srinivas, Narottam and Dukhi Krishnadas came from Bengal, he taught them. And he gave them the titles Acharya, that's for Narottam Das. No, that's for Srinivas Acharya. And the second one, Thakur, Narottam Thakur, and Shyamananda. He changed Dukhi Krishnadas to Shyamananda. He then sent them back to Bengal with all the scriptures that had been written by the Goswamis, with instructions to preach the religion of the holy names and love of Krishna. So that's the first traveling Sankirtan party. It is, literally, yeah.
An ox cart.
Yeah, Bullock. He received the news of the loss of the scriptures, and later he received the news later of their retrieval. So that's the whole story in Narottam Das Thakur's biography and also in Bhakti Ratnakara. Those details are there about the king Bir Hambir, who was always sending his group of thieves for anyone going through his kingdom, and they would plunder them. Yeah, but he had an astrologer also that would tell him, "O king, there's this group that are coming through. They have a very great treasure with them." And he told that concerning these three traveling persons with their bullock cart, and that they had big treasures. So he sent in the middle of the night, they stole what was there on the bullock cart, and then when they showed it to the king, "What is this?" Thought they had treasures, gold, silver, jewels, all this. But he really didn't know what treasures these were. Can you imagine? This is probably the first, copies ever made of the Goswami literatures. The originals were kept in Vrindavan, from what I heard. But these were copies, handmade copies of all the books written by Rupa and Sanatan and Jiva Goswami's books. So they were carrying these to Bengal, right? But later, when they woke up in the morning and saw that it was gone, can you imagine how devastated they would be? Right? But nevertheless, Srinivasacharya volunteered, "I will stay here and I'll search for them. I'll find them. And you too, you should go. Continue on." And then he somehow found out that the king had these people that stole these scriptures. So, and also the king, he's actually, in a way, he was a Vaishnava, because he liked to hear Katha, and he had some scholars who were now reading Srimad Bhagavatam and so forth. And Srinivasacharya came into that assembly. And at some point, Srinivasacharya noticed that whatever was coming from these pundits, was not exactly correct. And then he volunteered, "Oh, I want to speak such and such." And when the king heard him speak, then he was completely impressed. And anyway, eventually it was that king gave the scriptures back, and then Srinivasacharya. It's interesting that the Radha Damodar temple, when you're coming around in the other side, not the Rupa Goswami side, but the other side, where there's so many different samadhis. There's a samadhi of Bir Hambir there. Yeah, and his queen's name, but I forget her name. Yeah, I think it's more recently put there. I don't. Sometimes they're suddenly, making a samadhi that may have been there for even a couple hundred years or whatever, but then they renew it and they make it a little bigger, and then you can see it because there are so many. All right, so yes. So Jiva Goswami received the news of the loss of the scriptures and then later of their retrieval. He gave the title Kavi Raj to both Ramachandra, Sane, and to his Ramachandra's brother Govinda. So they're both named Ramachandra Kaviraj and Govinda Das Kaviraj. They both wrote beautiful Sanskrit poetry and songs. And there's one most famous song in particular written by Govinda Das Kaviraj, that we have in our songbook. And everyone in Bengal knows this song. Yes, Bhajo Maha. Yes. So during his lifetime, during Jiva Goswami's lifetime, Janava Devi and the other devotees came to Vrindavan. And when Bengali devotees came to Braj, he arranged for their victuals.
Food?
What?
They're foodstuffs.
For shot.
Yeah, but I'm wondering, I haven't seen it as victuals before. That's probably where the abbreviation vitals came from. Vitals, victuals. Okay, so Jiva Goswami would arrange for their victuals, their lodgings during their stay. We heard this. This is also in Chaitanya Charitamrita. The loss of the scriptures referred to in the above paragraph took place when agents of the king Virhambir of Vana Vishnupur stole them. Later, when the king heard Srinivasacharya speak on the Bhagavat, he was converted to Vaishnavism and took initiation from him. The books were thus recovered by Srinivas, and all this is described in full in this volume in chapter 17 on Srinivas Acharya. Now comes the section Jiva's Writings and Controversies. In the Bhakti Ratnakara, a list has been given of 25 works ascribed to Jiva. Number 1, Harinamamrita Vyakaran. You know what that is? Harinamamrita Vyakaran. Very well known, yes. It's a Sanskrit grammar system written by Jiva Goswami for learning Sanskrit grammar, which is based completely upon Harinam, the different names of Krishna. So you know, there's a standard Sanskrit grammar called Panini grammar. Panini, that's what's used in universities throughout the world. I know this because Jagat Mohini, the Russian translator of Gurudev's books, her daughter, Radhika, who's, I don't know what she's been doing during this year, but she's been in her PhD class in university in Harvard. You know of her?
Yeah.
You ever met her?
In India, but not.
I met her when she was 7 years old.
Little girl.
Yeah.
Anyway, she's probably about 28 now, and you know, she's gone through, I mean, in Vrindavan, there's one of our Gaudiya Vaishnavas named Sridhar Maharaj, another Sridhar Maharaj, who's also scholarly, and years ago, back in the early 1990s, he wanted that the Gaudiya Vaishnavas of the Gaudiya Mat would become, there would at least be a section of them that would become scholarly. They would know Sanskrit. They would, you know, go into depth into the Shastras and so forth. He wanted to carry on such a tradition. So he started teaching. And I remember in that time, Jai Shri Shri Guru Gauranga, Shri Shri Radha Govinda Jiva Ki Jai. Jai Radha. So, you know, there were certain individuals, even, you know, in our Mat and Gurudev's temples, some of the seniors, they went to attend those classes, which was a course that would last about 3 years. Very few of them finished it. But one of them is our Bhakti Swarup Sridhar Maharaj. He went through the whole thing, you know. And also this girl, Radhika, this was later. She went through the whole thing. She's the only girl that was ever accepted. Yeah? And she learned the whole Harinamamrita Vyakaran of Jiva Goswami. That's what he was teaching. And then later that enabled her to go to Varanasi University, where she went for like 4 years. Her mother moved there. And they lived there during that whole time, and she earned her master's degree, I think, there. And then they put out her requests for what they call scholarships and stuff. And she was accepted by Harvard University, you know. So, I mean, I've known her mother from the very beginning of going to Russia, you know. She has an apartment in Vrindavan. And she gives me reports on, and I also saw Radhika a few years ago when I was recuperating after my knee surgery there in Vrindavan. And so yeah, that in those universities they're taught Panini grammar, and that's the grammar system that is accepted by all the universities, right? So I've had talks with Radhika on so many levels about, you know, how the regular universities, they don't really accept this Harinamamrita Vyakaran, and there's a few other types of grammar systems. They kind of accept it as something colloquial, you know. They give it some credence, but not full. So after, you know, like Sridhar Maharaj, Bhakti Swarup Sridhar Maharaj, he went on studying Panini grammar with a tutor who would come there in Puri, and he's been studying it for many years. And, you know, very, very highly accomplished. So, anyway, we're reading the list of Srila Jiva Goswami's books. Second one is called Sutra Malika. Never heard of that one. Some of these I haven't heard of. Number 3, Dhatu Sangraha. 4, Krishnarchana Deepika. 5, Gopal Virudavali. 6, Rasamrita Shesh. 7, Madhava Mahotsav. We have that one in English, Madhava Mahotsav. Number 8, Sankalpa Kalpa Vriksha. That also has been translated into English. 9, Bhavarta Suchaka Champu. 10, Gopal Tapani Tika. That means commentary on Gopal Tapani Upanishad. 11, Brahma Samhita Tika, which we have. That's Gurudev's version of the Brahma Samhita. It has both Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Jiva Goswami's commentary. Then number 12, Rasamrita Tika, that probably Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Number 13, Ujjvala Tika, Ujjvala Nilamani. 14, Yogasar Stavaka Tika. 15, Agni Purana Sta Gayatri Bhashya. I've heard of this. From the Agni Purana, there is a whole explanation of the Gayatri Mantra. And it also has some reference to Srimati Radhika, like the Brahma Gayatri Mantra commentary that Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj wrote. You know, it's all completely worship of Srimati Radhika. Then number 16, Padma Puranokta Krishna Pada Padma Chinna. Oh yeah, that's about the marks from the Padma Purana. Padma Purana is describing the markings that are on the lotus feet of Krishna, Radha, Mahaprabhu, from the Padma Purana. So he's written such a book. 17, Sri Radhika Kara Pada Stita Chinna. That's about Sri Radhika's lotus markings on her lotus feet. 18, the magnificent, the ultimate Shastra written by Jiva Goswami. What is that? Gopal Champu. And it says Purva and Uttara divisions. Number 19, Krama Sandarbha. Now comes the Sat Sandarbha. Sat Sandarbha means the 6 Sandarbhas. What's the word again for a Sandarbha? It's like when you write a PhD thesis or something like that. It's something like that, the word Sandarbha. All right, so these 6 Sandarbhas are now listed here. The Krama Sandarbha, Tattva Sandarbha, Bhagavat Sandarbha, Paramatma Sandarbha, Krishna Sandarbha, and Bhakti Sandarbha, and Priti Sandarbha. Oh, there's 7. Oh, Sat Sandarbha. 7. I am corrected. I don't know why. I kept on thinking there's 6. No, there are 7. Krama, Tattva, Bhagavat, Paramatma, Krishna, Bhakti, and Priti. I should have known that.
I never heard of Krama one.
Yeah, I have. Now, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur has given the following warning in his Anubhashya to those inexperienced persons who might be deprived of Krishna praying through the influence of ignorant and offensive Sahajiya teachings. Quote, 3 slanderous ideas about Jiva Goswami are current among the ignorant Prakrita Sahajiyas. Anyone who becomes influenced by these calumnies will increase his offenses and will end up losing his taste for service to the Supreme Lord, because they are at the very root inimical to Krishna, the Guru, and the Vaishnavas. Number 1. It is said that a certain Digvijay scholar who was eager to amass mundane prestige, he came to Rupa and Sanatan to get their signatures as an admission of defeat in debate. Jiva's gurus conceded defeat without any argument. That's Rupa and Sanatan. They're not going to bother. Oh, you want me? Okay, here, they stand. Right? They conceded defeat without any argument, and the arrogant scholar proclaimed them to be nothing but ignorant fools. He then asked Jiva to also sign such an admission of defeat. Jiva, however, decided to take on the puffed-up Brahmin in debate in order to silence his scurrilous tongue. In this way, he preserved the integrity of his spiritual master's reputation and demonstrated the ideal behavior of one who is Guru Devatatma, or in other words, one who recognizes his spiritual master to be his worshipable deity and very source of life. The ignorant Sahajiyas, however, they say, this is what they say, that Jiva's behavior goes contrary to Mahaprabhu's teaching of being humbler than a blade of grass, and of giving respect to others while demanding none for oneself. Indeed, Rupa Goswami chastised Jiva for this very reason, and also ostracized him for some time. But later, Sanatan interceded on Jiva's behalf and had Rupa accept him again into his association. So, there's a quote here. It doesn't say. Quote, only when these enemies of the spiritual master, oh, this is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, it's going back to his quote. Only when these enemies of the spiritual master and the Vaishnavas receive Krishna's mercy, and they begin to see themselves as their eternal servant, then will they also receive Jiva's blessings and be able to understand what it really means to be humbler than a blade of grass and a giver of respect to all. Only then will they be eligible to chant the holy names in the proper way. So this is the first of 3 points that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has crushed them, defeated. Number 2, some other ignorant Sahajiyas say that when he saw the manuscript of Chaitanya Charitamrita, with its clear language, when Jiva Goswami saw, and brilliant explanation of the divine devotional sentiments of Vraja, that Jiva was afraid that it would hamper his own scholarly reputation and therefore threw it down a well in a spirit of mean-mindedness. But this is some ridiculous statement by them. Upon hearing of Jiva's action, this is continuing what they say, then Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami was greatly shocked and immediately gave up his body. Krishnadas's disciple, Mukunda, had fortunately made a copy of the original manuscript, and thus it was preserved and later published. Had he not done so, the Chaitanya Charitamrita would have been lost forever. This is another contemptible bit of invention based on an inimical attitude to the Guru and Vaishnava. It has no basis in reality, and there is no possibility of its being true. So, 3rd point. According to other sense-obsessed fornicators, Srila Jiva Goswami should not be accepted as an exemplar because in his treatises he opposed the idea that the gopis of Vrindavan were married to other men, the Parakiyavad, but rather he supported the Swakiyavad. We've heard this before, right? Yes. They say that he cannot be accepted as a Rasik Bhakta, or a devotee who is knowledgeable in the divine sentiments. The fact is that during Jiva's lifetime, some of his followers demonstrated a preference for the Swakiya Vad. Swakiya means that Krishna and Radha are married like that. So Jiva recognized their limitations. And so for their benefit, and for the benefit of those in the future who would be unable to comprehend the transcendental nature of the Parakya Vad, and would try to practice adulterous relationships themselves in imitation of Krishna, he accepted the Swakiya doctrine. This is a sign of his acting as an acharya. One should not take this as evidence of his being opposed to the transcendental Parakya Vad, however, for he is the topmost of Rupa Goswami's followers and one of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's spiritual teachers. So those are the 3 points. So next section is Rupa's mercy to Jiva. Narahari has shown how Rupa Goswami instructed Jiva, then punished him, and then blessed him, in a story told in Bhakti Ratnakara. One hot summer day, while Rupa was writing Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and Jiva fanning his perspiring body, Ballabha Bhatta, that's Ballabha Acharya. So Ballabha Bhatta came by to see Rupa Goswami. And after reading some of Rupa's introductory verses from his newly written Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he offered to make corrections. He offered to edit. So when Ballabha went to the Yamuna to take a bath, Jiva followed him on the pretext of going to fetch water. In fact, he was angry because he considered Ballabha's proposal to be arrogant. And he asked him what fault he had found in Rupa's verse. Ballabha told him, and Jiva immediately showed him the flaws in his argument. Then a debate ensued in which Jiva countered every one of Ballabha's objections. When he came back to Rupa's hut, Ballabha told him how impressed he was with Jiva's scholarship, recounting the entire episode. Then Rupa gently rebuked Jiva, telling him to return to Bengal and to come back to Vrindavan only when he was sufficiently calm. Thus banished from his presence, Jiva left Rupa Goswami's dwelling, but rather than going back to the family home, as he had been told, he went to Nandagat, a nearby village. And hoping to regain his guru's favor, he began to practice rigorous austerities, worshipping Krishna intensely while fasting or eating only a bare minimum. As a result of such severe practices, his body became weak and sickly, and one day Sanatana Goswami came by there and was moved when he saw his condition. He took Jiva with him back to Rupa and interceded on his behalf with his brother. Thus Rupa and Jiva were reconciled, and Jiva once again won Rupa's affectionate blessings. Jiva Goswami's appearance day is on Bhadra Shukla Dvadashi. His disappearance day is Paush Shukla Tritiya. Today is Tritiya. His deity, Radha Damodar, is still being worshipped in the Radha Damodar temple in Vrindavan, and his Samadhi tomb is on the grounds of the Radha Damodar temple, and his Bhajan Kutir is preserved in Sri Radha Kunda near Lalita Kunda. That's the end of Srila Bhakti Vallabha Tirtha Maharaj's short biographical sketch on Jiva Goswami's transcendental life. So, why is Jiva Goswami particularly very important for us Western devotees? There's one very nice, intimate reason.
He teaches some Mandalyan.
No, not that. Because his temple is called the Radha Damodar Temple. Who stayed in that temple? Who took shelter there? Who wrote the first books of Srimad Bhagavatam there, the purports? Who prayed in the middle of the night? This is in Mula Prakriti's book. Witnessed by one of the families of the Goswamis who knew Prabhupada at that time. And he said, he told this amazing story, that this would not only happen one night, but it happened on many nights. That in the middle of the night, he would see sometime in the moonlight or whatever in the courtyard, that there was this personality, Bhaktivedanta Swami, who was sweeping with a broom in front of Rupa Goswami's Samadhi and Bhajan Kutir, and calling and crying, weeping and calling out, "Hey Rupa, hey Jiva, hey Sanatan, when will you give me your mercy? When will you give me your mercy? How can I do it if I don't have your mercy?" Prabhupada would be crying out in that way. And Jiva Goswami, his very Samadhi is there. Rupa Goswami's Samadhi is there. And we've also heard that they appeared to Srila Prabhupada in a vision and gave him their mercy and their blessings. So Jiva Goswami, he's so important in our Sampradaya. So important. Just to complete, our reading tonight, we heard the names of all the, something like 22 different books that he has written. Srila Prabhupada, I remember, he used to say this, that Jiva Goswami is the greatest scholar that ever lived. And it's told in Chaitanya Charitamrita. How many verses, approximate, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is describing, how many verses were written by Rupa Goswami? Shlokas, actual composed by him, in all of his works. And according to that, there's like 100,000 shlokas, something, Rupa and Sanatan Goswami. But Jiva Goswami, you know how many shlokas? 400,000. Yeah. So Jiva Goswami is the greatest scholar. And of course, by the will of the Lord, he took birth in the family of Rupa and Sanatan as their nephew. But he's from Goloka Vrindavan, and their relation is also there. And in the Kunja, the Nikunjas, they're all there serving Radha and Govinda in Goloka Vrindavan. So in this incarnation, Jiva Goswami, he became the protector. He became the protector of the Siddhanta and the presentations that Rupa and Sanatan Goswami and the other Goswamis were presenting to the world. It's described that just like when you want to make a fortress, you have a castle, right? In medieval times, we've seen how they build a castle, and in order to protect the castle, what do they build around it? A moat. Yes.
Water.
So Srila Jiva Goswami, he also did this for the literatures presented by the other Goswamis in order to substantiate, ironclad. No one can ever defeat anyone. No scholar, no anyone can ever defeat Srila Jiva Goswami and his presentation of the Sat Sandarbhas. Because there, he is completely showing what Rupa and Sanatan have given, and he is substantiating everything according to all the Shastras. They themselves also did, but especially Jiva Goswami, that's why he's called the Siddhanta Acharya of the Gaudiya Vaishnava line. He is the Siddhanta Acharya. And so, any devotee who wants to thoroughly and very deeply understand the teachings and the conceptions that were given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through the 6 Goswamis, they'll have to go to Jiva Goswami and his Sandarbhas, and those Sandarbhas are the philosophical presentation that no one can ever defeat and say, oh, this Sampradaya, this is all imaginary, these persons, these Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, they're just writing, imaginary things. No. Jiva Goswami has substantiated. So on this day, the Transcendental Disappearance Day of Srila Jiva Goswami, where we've become fortunate to hear his holy name, and although I've been a little bit neglectful, I'm noticing that a number of days have gone by of various other acharyas. Even today, I can't remember on the calendar, but it's another associate of Mahaprabhu. There's been about 5 or 6 that have gone by, and Srila Bhaktivigyan Bharati Maharaj would always stress that you have to say something about them. At least you have to glorify them and mention them on their appearance and disappearance days. So we'll have to get back into that proper mode so that we don't commit any aparadh. So Srila Jiva Goswami Prabhupada ki jai, Shri 6 Goswamis ki jai, Rup Sanatana ki jai, Gaur Premanandi, Pancha Kalpataruneksha, Kripa Sindhu Devaja, Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo